Well, I just came in from the grocery and I thought I've got a subject for another video. So I'm wandering through the house, and this was going to be a long video. So I wasn't sure I had enough time because I have to go out later this afternoon. I said, okay, I'm walking through and I pick up a cookbook. And I said, wait a minute. I'm not going to tell that story. I'm going to talk about this cookbook that I picked up at a Goodwill store. Now, you're going to find this interesting. Every now and then I do look at the books at the Goodwills, and every now and then I find a cookbook. That's usually the only thing I'm looking for. So, gonna have to go back a few years. I was visiting my daughter. She lived out in the country, and it was a Sunday afternoon, I think. And we drove into town, and we stopped at a little garden shop. The lady there, very, very pleasant. She had all kinds of cute things that you'd want to put in your flower garden or on your porch or in your yard. And Jan was kind of looking for bird feeders and that sort of thing. We got into a conversation, and the lady started telling us that her son was a gardener. In fact, he had a rather notable gardener because he had built penthouse gardens in New York City. That put him on the map. And he had made a name for himself, and there were articles in the newspapers and what have you. So the little garden shop didn't last long, and it's a few years later, more than a few years later. Now, I have bought this cookbook. It's called Favorite Recipe from a Treasury of Country Inns and Lodges. And the name at the bottom is Lucille Bowling Karloftis. That meant nothing to me. So, I liked the book though. Oh, did I like the book. I marked pages. And these are, most of them are country inns in Kentucky. Places I've been, we're familiar with. Now, she went all over the United States creating this cookbook from the inns in every state. You get a recipe from every one of them. This was a cookbook I knew I was going to keep. Now let's go ahead a little. I'm with my two friends, one from Ohio and the other lived nearby. And we are taking the old road from Lexington, and we're passing a little place called the Trading Post. Now, I had been there before. Trading Post, several acres of land right on the river. It was beautiful, beautiful. There was a red salt box house. You know what a salt box house looks like. And had a fence in front right along the old road, and there was a lot of bamboo. Bamboo grew very tall, gave it a more private look. Next to that house is an old one-room schoolhouse. You would love it. You can just look through the windows of the door and see everything inside. Delightful. The son, the gardener, had really worked on that property. It was in I would say call it in levels. You went down and down and down till you got to the river. And of course, there was a garden shop right up next to the road called the Trading Post. Now, one of my friends knew the lady that was running this garden shop. And they talked a few minutes when we went in. And the first thing the lady, Lucille, said was, "You just missed Southern living." What? Southern living was here? They were driving off just as you pulled in. Well, we were pretty excited about that. They were filming the Trading Post. They had done it before, and they had been featured in Southern Living magazine. Okay, she had a big basket, one of those big apple baskets, filled with strawberries. They had brought her strawberries from Georgia. She let us sample some of them, and oh my, they were so good. So, my friend from Ohio wanted to look around the property. They even had a great big, I don't know what you call it, I'll call it a cage with a white peacock. And there was an old rusty pickup truck just sitting out in nowhere. But it's one of those things that makes everything go together. So while they did their looking around, I wanted to talk to Lucille. Lucille started telling me about the Trading Post and when she and her husband first started. She met her husband in a little town called Pineville. She and I both were Kentucky girls, and I think they may have had about 6 children, I'm guessing at this. She's telling me their story. They started a wigwam village right there where the Trading Post was. And this village, I'd passed it many times because I lived in Louisville and in Lexington, and you drove right by the wigwam village. Well, Lucille got all of her merchandise in Florida. She had one full-blooded Indian, Cherokee Indian, who worked at the wigwam village, and people and children loved stopping there. They always had to buy something. I used to buy bittersweet, if you know what bittersweet is. If you don't, look it up on the internet. And I would buy that to decorate flower arrangements and things in my house. I got a frog in my throat. Got to do something about that. So anyway, we're talking, and she said the wigwam village that they had, the full-blooded Cherokee Indian, he would entertain the children, and of course they always had to have some kind of souvenir that came from there, and Indian artifacts. You could buy most anything. And I can remember wanting to stop time after time, and I did buy a chair from there. One time it was a ladder-back chair. They had them lined up sitting along the road, and I said, I want one of those chairs. Well, she's talking to me, and she says something about the Trading Post being there on Rockcastle River. And I said, she mentioned Rockcastle River Bridge. I said, Lucille, my dad built Rockcastle River Bridge. And she says, well, now there's 2 of them. One of them has the overhang, the rails, all of that. The other one is just a concrete-sided bridge. I said, well, I really don't know which one he built. I'm going to have to do a little research and see which he built, because the one with the side rails and the overhang, I don't know what you call that stuff. that holds the bridge together. But the city was ready to tear it down. It was very old. And some engineers came in, took a look at that bridge and said, no, no, there's nothing wrong with this bridge. You leave it like it is. They left it like it is, but they gave it a really good paint job, painted it green. Okay, we discussed that, and then while we were talking, we talked about our childhood. Now, Lucille was older than I. She was in her 80s. She wore those big straw hats. She looked beautiful in those hats. They just were perfect for her. And she had such personality. So something was said about when we were children, where we had lived. And this is one of the stories she told me, and I still today think it is one of the funniest things I've ever heard. She talked about her husband and her children when they were running the Wigwam Village. They would drive from Kentucky to Florida. She and her husband and 6 children made the round trip to Florida in a Volkswagen. That blew my mind. I said, 6 kids in a Volkswagen? She said, yeah, that's how we traveled. Well, I had to laugh at that. I said, that just amazes me. I would love to have had pictures of that. So we got to talking a little more about our childhood, and she mentioned something about Manchester, Kentucky. I said, well, my family lived in Manchester when I was a toddler. She said, well, my family lived there, and she started describing the house they lived in. I said, Lucille, you're describing the house my family lived in. She says, she just went on and she says, well, the Potters lived up the street. Now, the Potters, he was a druggist, I think, had his drugstore just a few blocks up the street. Well, they lived up the street in this big white house with columns. And she said, I used to play with Nancy Potter. And I looked at her again and I said, Lucille, my sister played with Nancy Potter. Oh, that couldn't be. I said, yes. I said, it's the same one, a small town like that, same family. And she said, Miss Potter had a little machine on her kitchen table that she used to make beaten biscuits. I said, yes. My sister would come home and she would just be thrilled because Nancy's mother had made beaten biscuits, put jelly and butter on them. And she used to love to watch her work that little machine. I said, this just doesn't sound real. It just can't be real. But it is real. But I said, finally came to the conclusion, Lucille, my family moved out of that house and your family moved in the house as soon as we left. What a coincidence that was, that this lady in her 80s and I would meet. And we had lived in the same rental house. She remembered the courthouse. She remembered the Potters and their big white fine house with columns. And I would tell her about my sisters going to school there, and they played in the park. And we were just amazed at what we had in common. And I said, Lucille, I've got your cookbook. I never knew who you were, but I bought your cookbook in a Goodwill store. And this is the cover. This is my favorite cookbook. You will find recipes. Let's see the first one that I marked. Beaumont Inn, right here, Beaumont Inn. And they give a corn pudding recipe. Somewhat like mine, but a little different. Probably get the same results. Beaumont Inn is about 30 miles from here. Then let's go to another one. Let's see what it is. Boone Tavern Hotel. If you've ever traveled and you go through Kentucky, I-75, you're going to know about Boone Tavern. There's the Berea College there, and there's a story about the students that go to school there. Boone Tavern Inn. Now this is a recipe I've never heard of. Cream of pimento soup. I might have to try that sometime. This book was published in 1987. What were the chances I would pick up this book at Goodwill? We go on. I'm just marking the one that I know the places. The next one is Dudley's. Dudley's is just down the street from me. I've been in business a long time. I've eaten there. It's been a while. Now I'm going to check the last one I marked. Well, it's here somewhere. Okay. Gotta find it. Because it might be the best one. You never can tell. Just might be the best one in the book. Okay, these aren't easy to find. Well, I don't know anything about this one or why I marked it, but it must have had something to do with the Russian chicken. Oh, I know, from Sevierville, Tennessee. Sevierville, Tennessee, you gotta go through Sevierville if you're going to the Great Smoky Mountains. And I can remember eating in a little cafe there. It's funny the things you recall. This has been 60 years ago. I had roast beef with gravy, mashed potatoes. And I'm telling you, I've always remembered that meal. Just a dinky little cafe, but they had the best food. I never went back there again, but I always remembered that one meal and how good it was. And Sevierville, you're going to go through Sevierville to get to Pigeon Forge, Dolly Parton's place, and the Gatlinburg. You're going to climb the mountain in Gatlinburg. You can go to the Cove. Yeah, that's what it is. Beautiful, beautiful land and a lot of bears. People have always been warned about the bears. Just steer clear. I thought you would enjoy that story because of the connection I have to the lady that wrote this book. And I would never have dreamed I would meet her years down the road. She died a few years ago. I met one of her daughters, and her son is still very popular for his gardening. In her garden shop, she had 2 or 3 stacks of his books that he had published. And most likely, if you went on the internet, you would be able to find information about him. His name is John Karloftis, Carloftis. And I hope he appreciates me giving him a plug today. We've never met, but now he's going to find out. People know who he is. And he's had a lot of publicity through the years. Now, I hope you like that little story. It just one just popped up, and I said, I think I'll talk about Lucille. She was a fantastic lady. She had personality, and she had that charm. When she put that big straw hat on, you just knew right then and there you were going to love this lady. And she was lovable. And I've got my story that I can tell about Lucille and Pat. So I hope you've enjoyed this one, and let me know if you do. And if you look up Karloftis on the internet, I want to know what you learned. Of course, I might look it up myself. There's nothing that says I can't do it. Have a good day. I've got to take my car, get it fixed again. That each time I've taken it, they haven't fixed it. So this time, I'm counting on getting it fixed. That's why I went to the grocery. I wanted to make sure I had my Dr. Peppers on hand in case they have to keep my car 2 or 3 days. So, let me know what you think about this story. I'm anxious to hear from you. Bye-bye.